opening up about your mental health, normalizing it, because it's an incredibly normal conversation to have. You don't realize until you have that first breakthrough moment, you sit down with a mate and you have a conversation which traditionally you wouldn't. You then find that there's a lot of common ground. I think it's those small conversations that bring that kind of gradual change.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Kubrick Voices. I'm really excited. This is the first episode of season 2. We're back and we've got a really important conversation today. It's Movember. We're recording on November 22nd. So we're in the midst of it. And most importantly, we're here to talk about the kind of aspects of men's mental health that comes with the conversation around Movember. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Tom White, who's a Kubrick Advanced consultant and a mental health first aider at Kubrick, as well as Euan Newlands, who's a data engineer working in one of our insurance clients. And he's just sort of getting started on his Kubrick journey. So hello both. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hello, Camilla. How you doing?
I'm fab, thanks. To get started, Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself, your kind of background and journey with the mental health discussion.
Yeah, sure. So I'm about 4 years into my Kubrick journey. And I think I first started sort of thinking about mental health in the workplace probably about 2 or 3 years ago, just because I think it sort of coincided with COVID and a lot of those sort of feelings of loneliness and those themes of, I guess, sort of segmented work, where you're working kind of on your own all the time, every single day. And I think because of that, I think the instant shift into this sort of virtual arena of work was such a interesting and difficult time for a lot of people. And coming out of that and moving to the US, I'm now in New York. I think there was an opportunity for me to really understand how I can support people. And I think we're in essence starting out our New York journey here, and there's a lot of people that are coming and seeing Kubrick for the first time. And I think it's really important that we have that capacity to help support people where it's required, but also just to sort of destigmatize the word around mental health and really provide some conversation, which is what this is, which is why I'm very grateful to be here. But that's essentially my journey into it. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you made note of the elephant in the room. Tom and I are both remotely recording in from Kubrick's new US office, so we haven't got quite the glamorous setup that Euan has back in London. Euan, hi, thanks for joining.
Hello.
From the London office.
Jacob's set me up really nicely in the recording studio in the QVS. So yeah, I'm a data engineer. I've been here about 5 months now, which is flowing. 4 weeks with my client, and yeah, I'm just excited to be here. I guess why I'm here, out of like so many people that could be here, is I'm just interested in people. I kind of made that apparent to John Coughlin, who's a mental health first aider as well within Kubrick, and he was like, yeah, do you want to do this opportunity with the podcast? And yeah, interested in people. I've done some volunteering, helping people, I guess. I worked with a charity called the True Athlete Project, who use sport as a tool to try and encourage self-awareness and like mental well-being, the growth in like mental well-being. And yeah, I have a bit of a science background. I studied astrophysics, so I'm always kind of asking questions why, and I think that mixed with my interest in people makes me want to ask, like, why is mental health such a kind of, why is there a stigma around it? Like, why do we get stressed? Like, why do certain tools help with mental well-being, and not just kind of doing it because people say to do it, but yeah, just trying to understand why. And hopefully some of my own interests and research will be useful in this conversation today. And yeah, just excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And you guys have already touched on a couple of really key points around stigma and spaces that we kind of operate in, and how mental health kind of plays a part in all that. And so we've got a lot to cover, and I'm sure we'll get cracking. But just to kind of preface, why are we having this conversation now? Movember is all about men's health in general, whether that's physical health, but also increasingly mental health. And just to kind of give our listeners and watchers a few key stats to take away why this is going to be so important, in the UK and the US. So in both spaces that Kubrick's operating, over 75% of suicides are completed by men. making them about 4 times more likely to complete suicide than women. And women are still more likely to seek out mental health treatment than men. That is changing. We're seeing some really great progress. So men have had an uptick in mental health resource use in the last year or so. And I think the pandemic, like Tom touched on, was a really good opportunity for people to reflect and think about mental health in a new kind of way. And so we're seeing for the first time since 2000, suicide rates decreasing. So we're definitely having conversations and we're getting things going, but there's still a journey ahead of us. So thinking about that and thinking about stigma, which I think, Tom, you touched on, especially there in your intro, about 40% of male respondents in a recent survey to the Priory group said that they had never discussed mental health with anyone, which is a pretty high rate. And when we think of mental health as health, you wouldn't think of 40% of people just never discussing their health with someone, whether that's just mentioning that you have a cold. So, there's a lot of stigmas to break down. Tom, in your experience, kind of how have you felt stigma in your life, especially in male spaces? Is that something that you've come across in your experience growing up?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think it's incredibly typical to, especially in male circles, to sort of shy away from topics, because that stigma, I think, is very much baked in just outward masculinity that people sort of want to present. And I think part of the realization that is key is that opening up about your mental health, and to your point, normalizing it, because it's an incredibly normal conversation to have, whether you're feeling a bit anxious or you're struggling a bit with work and you're feeling a bit stressed, or through to opening up about if you're suffering from severe depression or whatever it is. I think normalizing those conversations and ensuring that it's not done in a way where it does feel like you're trading off your masculinity, or feel like you're misrepresenting yourself in any way. And I think it's in those circles where that conversation needs to happen. And I think it's really easy to do as well. I think you don't realize until you have that first breakthrough moment where you have a really, you sit down with a mate and you have a conversation which traditionally you wouldn't have, and you then find that there's a lot of common ground to cut, that you both are going through very similar things. And I think it's those small conversations that bring that kind of gradual change, which is increasingly important. And I think just to sort of follow what you're saying, I'm seeing over the past sort of couple of years, I definitely think that there is this uptake where people are beginning to have that conversation in a bit more depth. Whereas in the past, I can't remember ever having a conversation with like friends or family about how you're feeling and how you're handling the day-to-day pressures of life. And I think that's really promising to see. But I still think there's a lot more that, especially in the workplace and outside the workplace, that we can do to sort of help incentivize that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that idea of common experience or having a common ground or scenario to kind of touch base on and use that as an opportunity to start in a conversation. I know, in Kubrick, we're unique as a workplace where we do have these 4 months of training so that people really are going through the same experience at the same time, so to speak. And knowing that people are on a kind of similar journey gives us that opportunity to open that conversation to our consultants. I mean, Euan, you've just been on the other side of that training. You're now on client site. Are there things that you're doing to kind of stay connected to people that were in your cohort? Did you kind of find a support system during your time in training? What was kind of your experience with that? And how did you get to know John Coughlin from the training side, our kind of head mental health first aider?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit to unpack there. But first of all, I think, I don't know how Kubrick do it, but they do find good people. So my cohort was just full of great people. Not a single person that wasn't kind of up for a conversation and wanting to kind of really get stuck in, not just to the work here, but like to the almost community that formed within the cohort. I found some great people. Everyone's great, but just stay in touch with a couple people through like WhatsApp and sometimes a Teams message here and there. During the training, some of the consultants said about John was that he really connected with us as people as well. and it wasn't just like, oh, I'm here to kind of deliver you some training. He does some data visualization, so we did Power BI with him. He was just one of our favorites. I don't know if I can say that as a trainer, just because of that connection. So yeah, he was a great trainer, really connected with the consultants on like a very personal level, not by doing anything other than just, I think, his understanding of how to work with people well.
It's great that we have people like John kind of helping create that sense of community within Kubrick's kind of training and consulting, like you mentioned kind of at the start of this conversation. And I think it's also really important to recognize those spaces where people feel part of a community or don't feel that they're kind of under pressure to talk about things in a formal way or a clinical setting. So a space like team sports, which can be a very safe space for a lot of men, and one where it has kind of a casual community feel, can be a great way to kind of engage in conversations and do those kind of important touch points and check-ins that a lot of people don't give enough credit to. So Euan, in your experience, kind of how did you find working in that space as a volunteer, and how did mental health kind of come into play there?
So with the True Athlete Project, they recognise, that charity recognises that working with them, they use sport as a tool to develop self-awareness within young athletes. So my experience there was, I was a mentor with a young teenager for about 6 months. During those 6 months, I went through some training with mindfulness, some compassionate communication, but for the most part I would meet up with this young person and we just engage with activities that they were interested in. And as you'll know, like, developing a relationship it's not just, there's no kind of way to do it. You can't do it in a few weeks, you can't do it in a few months. So the 6 months essentially just looked like that, but like every week just kind of learning a little bit more about my mentee, eventually kind of what they wanted to do after school, kind of what their aspirations were, what was kind of going on in their life at home, and kind of along the way just doing things they were interested in, trying to incorporate activities such as mindfulness into the activities they were interested in. So my mentee really enjoyed basketball, so we would do some mental well-being and mindfulness exercises within the kind of the basketball space on the basketball court, and we can talk about mindfulness soon, but what that might have looked like was bouncing a basketball, but like really focusing on bouncing the basketball, but not just the action of it, but like, how does it feel? How does your left hand feel that's not touching the ball if your right hand's bouncing it? How do your feet feel? Kind of what's the tension like in your body, in your chest, that sort of stuff. And that just trying to incorporate these activities that have been proven to strengthen your self-awareness in really familiar activities, and I think that saw a lot of success and kind of gave this young person a tool to develop their self-awareness somewhere where they were comfortable. So
I think make it as well pretty easy, right? Like I think there's a misconception that like being on top of your mental health and like having a positive mental health is difficult or like requires a lot of work. And I think what you just described, I think, is a really cool example, because it's really pertinent to the person, like relevant to the person. But also it's not that like it's a really simple activity and exercise to sort of undergo. And I think likewise with most of these sort of tools and and sort of techniques that people follow, a lot of them just require a bit of time and like and an open mind, and to sort of not necessarily have a predetermined sort of goal or expectation of what that's going to mean to you, but just to try it out. And I think that's quite a cool way that you've sort of coached someone that's young through that by focusing on it being basketball and like making it fun, etc. But
I think in sport as well, all sports, and not just sport, but because we're talking about sport in this case, it's quite an emotive space. It can elicit a lot of positive emotion, but also negative emotion. If you're trying to score in football or in basketball or netball and you miss and you think, I should be doing better than that, like you can kind of have some negative self-talk. But kind of during this volunteering journey, something they highlighted was a lot of the time the reaction is more harmful than the cause. So if you miss a shot in basketball, like you've missed a shot, but you might react, you might get angry, you might get tense, and the ball's not gone in the hoop, but you're all tense and angry and kind of upset with yourself.
But also, your reaction might actually have a negative impact on the next time you go and set yourself up to shoot in the basketball and you're feeling angry and tense. And I think there is similarities with work, and in that regard I think it's slightly different, right? Because sport, you have the space to be emotive. You always see people throw their hands up in the air or curse and swear at the referee or whatever it is. In work, that doesn't really exist, but I do think it still is the case. I think people just hide it underneath a layer of themselves and
professionalism.
Yeah, exactly. And putting regards rather than kind regards, that kind of and I think but I do think it has a similar outcome, which is twofold. Firstly, you do open yourself up to more stressful situations and not being able to deal with things in the right way. But secondly, I also think it does, over a course of a lifetime in your career, does mean that you continuously probably don't get the same outcomes. And if you had a really positive way of dealing with stress, because it's something that we all kind of go through, right? It's a consistent issue that we all face in the workplace, is stress. And sometimes some things go your way, sometimes they won't. And that kind of reality, I think, is really important to come to terms with, but also learn how to cope with in a healthy, non-emotive, stress-free kind of way. I don't know if Cam, if you got any thoughts on that.
No, I agree. I mean, and maybe we're just lucky to have not had colleagues or bosses who react to things in the workplace in an emotive way, but I think that also does happen, and that can obviously cause a lot of stress in the workplace and a lot of discomfort for people, and especially young people starting their careers, if they were to encounter any more senior members of the team having that emotive response to something in the workplace, would be have quite big consequences. But I think the other kind of interesting thread is the idea of teamwork. I think we kind of disassociate when we use the word team in the workplace with its meaning of team in sport context, but they really are as similar as there's a reason they share the same word. And I think a big misconception of tech and data is that it's a team sport. Actually, I think our Kubrick training is kind of geared around that idea. And so how are you working together to solve a problem like in a team sport, but equally looking out for each other as teammates, and supporting? So, I mean, Tom, you kind of lead teams, and also to go back to kind of Euan's point to his mentorship, kind of how do you view the role of a mentor in a team as a more senior consultant, and what do you feel your responsibility is towards ensuring people's mental well-being as part of your work team?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and again, quite a lot to unpack, I think. So, I mean, first, I think as soon as you join Kubrick, you join a cohort of 30 plus consultants potentially. You're always working in mini squads where you have the same deliverable, and you're kind of working that agile way, and there's a lot of collaboration into your client engagement, where you're all of a sudden, you might be on your own. Normally you'd have some sort of you'd have a lot of Kubrick support within that, whether that's through your CSM or a squad lead through Kubrick Advanced, or maybe some of your peers that are getting placed at the same time. So typically when you're joining a client, but there's already an existing team within the client, so you're joining that as well. There's a lot of people that I think you will have to work with, and I think it's kind of trying to figure out. I think the positive change out of COVID has been this idea of flexible work, and I think allowing for, firstly, identifying that everyone is different and responds differently to ways of working, but how to collaborate in a way which feels right for you, and ensuring that you kind of can find that out for yourself as you start out in your career. And personally, I love going into the office. So, I love being with people and seeing and talking in person, and not having consistent 30-minute meetings across my whole day. but rather being able to catch someone at a coffee machine and just have a quick chat. I think that's one of the hidden gems of the office place. But for other people, that might not necessarily be the case. So I think it's, especially in leadership and in senior leadership in particular, how do you allow for that and encourage that kind of that diversity of work environment, so that we can start kind of ensure that you recognize that there are differences in people, but also ensure that we're supporting them and making them successful. To your point about mentorship, I think the reality is that a mentor, I think everyone has this idea of a mentor being this really senior CEO figure of a person who's going to change your life and going to give you that structure and framework to really see through and make all the business decisions in your life feel great, and you're going to be on top of your game when you have that mentor. I think the reality is that a mentor just is someone that has a slightly different perspective than you, and that can be someone, that can be a peer, that can be someone that you might be working for you, the other direction, or it might be someone that's a bit more senior and has that experience. But I think the important thing is that I wouldn't see mentorship as this big, I think a lot of people have this brain block where it's like, I need to find a mentor. How am I going to go and find that mentor? Like, how I'm going to structure the ask and be like, can you be my mentor? When really it's just asking a few questions. It can be, it can be that simple, or like asking to go for a coffee and just get some advice from someone. And the great thing about Kubrick is, I think for in every instance where I've done that, at least, it's been received incredibly positively, because I think we value that as an organization. And if someone came to me and asked that question, I'd say yes without because I've been in their shoes before and have gone through those sort of hoops, and it can be quite stressful to be like, I kind of need some help, but I don't know how to ask for it. And I think that kind of loops back to this destigmatizing mental health and stress and workplace stuff, because I think the more open these corridors of communication are, I think the better the business can evolve and support people and be efficient and all of these great things. And I think enabling that is a really key part of why this mental health activity is so important. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think in my few months here as well, I've maybe asked 3 or 4 different people who have been here longer than me for just some feedback on certain activities, and it's all been received well. So big encouragement to anyone, even if you've been here 5 weeks, to if you feel like you've been involved with something, then just ask for some feedback, for sure.
And I think asking for feedback, part of that is having that self-awareness, which that you've been exercising, you, and in that kind of world of sport, is really beneficial, because by asking for feedback, it might not be positive, right? It might be more focused on how you can change, and be able to be self-aware that your feedback could affect you emotionally, positively or negatively, and how to cope with that.
I think be honest as well, and just, I don't know everything. A lot of young people coming in, there's maybe kind of an expectation, I need to kind of be this level, because otherwise I might get kicked out. Like that's a real kind of thought. You don't know what the expectations are coming into work. So I think my advice maybe would be, like, you're here, because like we want you at Kubrick, and people know that you don't know things, because if you did, you'd be running the business, you wouldn't be in at a graduate level. I think just be honest with yourself that you don't know everything, and I think that that's the best way to grow.
I'd go a step further. I think personally, having worked with people that I think are continuously searching for feedback, I think feedback is a great way of getting support, in a way, in a weird sense. But having worked with a number of people that are really, really, have that grit and that determination, even though it might not be necessarily what they want to hear, they're still really determined to find out how they can improve. But I think typically those are the people that I think are normally the ones that are focused on improvement and ensuring that they are gathering that feedback, normally are really, really positive people to work with, because they are just constantly trying to work on improving themselves. But I think it's more actually also on the other side of it, it's how do you give feedback that So, if we're assuming that there's a level, that feedback is a good thing to ask for, I think it's also guiding the conversation around what does that look like and how can you give that in a way where it's not like you're really bad at your job, whether that's true or not, or otherwise. But, it's more around, here's the things which I think you're doing really well. Here's some areas of improvement. And here's what I think you can do to get from where you are to where you think you should be, and identifying, and kind of it goes back to that sense of alignment of values that I think a lot of us have, that we all want to be better and we all want the company to do well and all of these great stuff. And I think acknowledging that as like our teams, a collective team's values and goals, and recognizing that people make mistakes and everyone's going through that growth, and that you're not going to be perfect when you're your first year out of university. You're not going to be perfect 50 years out of university. You know what I mean? So I think aligning on that common goal that we're all working on ourselves, and that we've all got very similar experiences, and we're kind of going through, but at the same time, very different experiences. But you know what I mean? It's kind of like just incentivizing that conversation around feedback in a way which is supportive of the individual, recognizing that actually supports the wider team, I think is really key to it. But
yeah, 100%. And I think it's good that you're kind of touching on those pressures and stigmas and biases that come in those first few years of work, where I don't know about you guys, I found my first year in the workplace was figuring out how to be in the workplace and navigating those conversations and giving people, especially in a business like Kubrick, where most of the people we employ are in their first 2 years of working, the space to explore that without feeling like they're, I don't know, going to be considered detrimental for asking the questions or figuring that stuff out. I mean, to return to that kind of idea of stigma and opening the conversation, you mentioned kind of mindfulness was a tool in the world of sport and can help you kind of refocus yourself. What was your own stigma around mindfulness and how to employ it, and kind of how did you get over it and embrace it?
Yeah. So when I kind of joined the True Athlete project, they were like, okay, we're gonna do some mindfulness, and I was a bit like, what's that? They were like, it's a bit like meditation. I was like, oh, that's seems a bit spiritual. I don't know. Meditation for me even now is like someone sitting going and it's you're like, wait, why is that good? What good is that doing? So I like to understand kind of why I'm doing something, what I'm getting myself into. So spent some time kind of looking at it, and found some like research papers that suggested that it actually changed your brain structure doing this mindfulness stuff. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. What does it do? And basically it can grow your prefrontal cortex, which is like your very human part of your brain. This bit does all your decision making, composure, kind of what makes us human, and simultaneously can shrink your amygdala, which is like your animal reactive emotive part of your brain. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Why what is it about mindfulness that does that? So yeah, like, what is mindfulness? So mindfulness is being present. I think that's the most kind of fundamental aspect of it, is like focusing on something that, there's a term like anchors you to the present. So a present moment anchor. Our brains as human beings think about the future and the past and everything else in between, like kind of all at once, all the time. So much so that in psychology that's known as our default state. Our brains are always doing other things, thinking about what's for dinner, or that conversation you had with your mum or your dad or your friends that kind of maybe you should have said something different. So it's always thinking about different things. So mindfulness is about focusing on being present, which is difficult because our default state is not being present. So I guess that circles back round to the meditation aspect of it, and which is the umming and the like. Okay, suddenly that umming makes a bit more sense because that's something keeping you present. It's not a natural sound you make. Personally, I don't when I like practice mindfulness. I think it's still a little bit too spiritual for me. I find my present moment anchors in kind of my day-to-day activities, or if I'm playing basketball. So day-to-day activities might be when I'm brushing my teeth. I'll like feel my brush as I'm brushing my teeth, kind of as it's moving from tooth to tooth. Can I tell if it's going tooth to tooth? Just like kind of not chatting to anyone, not on my phone, just really focusing on brushing my teeth. And hopefully my dental hygiene will benefit from that as well. If you don't want to do it brushing your teeth, if you're always busy brushing your teeth, maybe you can do it on your commute to work. Sometimes I'll be sitting on the tube, like what do the bumps feel like as it's like accelerating away, kind of what part of my body will move first. Will it be my shoulders? Will it be my hips? Will it like, am I going to slide a little bit? What do my feet feel like on the floor as like it's bumping? So just all these things that attach you to the present, and that are accessible kind of day to day. So I have to brush, well I don't have to, but I will brush my teeth twice a day. So I'm not expending time doing mindfulness or meditating outside like my normal like day to day activities. I don't have to come to work, but I like will come into the office. Obviously work from home. But yeah, on my commute, that's I can be mindful like during my day to day activities. So yeah, you don't need to expend additional time, even though it could just be like a minute or 2 minutes. And I think it's tricky. It's difficult. Like your default state is to go elsewhere. So when you're doing that, when you're focusing on your breathing as your chest expands and contracts as you're breathing, you will start thinking about what's for lunch. But the important part is noticing that and then bringing yourself back, and not like going, I've lost my present moment anchor again. It's okay. Be kind to yourself and then like come back again. Find that present moment anchor. Do that for like a minute, 2 minutes, and there's papers that suggest it has this massive effect on your brain structure, which I think is incredible.
I mean, if you think about like the workplace, I think it is the most probably. I spend most of my time not thinking about the future. Right? You've got, I'll be at my desk and typing out an email, being like, I need to send that email as well. Or like I'll be in a meeting, be like writing down notes, being like, I've got so much to do because of this. And I think it does often feel like you're living not in the present moment, because it is a lot of it is things you need to do, as well as the anxieties of things you might have not done well in the past. So, I do think it's a breeding ground for that kind of like, unless you focus on it and find these sort of techniques, I think you will just go through the majority of your life, which, work is 8 hours out of 24, 5 days a week until you're 60, 70, probably by the time we retire. And you spend all your time thinking about, but yeah, and you spend all your time thinking about what you should be doing rather than, focusing on where you are. And yeah, I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's definitely how those anxieties build up. If you're always thinking about something else, but also I think to bring it right around, you said it could literally grow your kind of frontal brain, our decision making, our kind of what we consider our human side, but arguably, I guess, what we consider our professional side to be, versus our animal brains, who we're not supposed to bring to work. So you can kind of feel more confident that you're bringing your sort of best, most quote unquote professional side to work if you're.
Yeah, and I think one of the like stigmas perhaps around mindfulness and meditation is that the metric for its success is my feelings, and feelings are already quite turbulent. So how can I attribute my feeling better, more relaxed to like this mindfulness practice? Like, for example, if I went to the gym, maybe I'd lose weight, maybe I'd gain some muscle. You can see the difference, you can weigh the difference. The metric is probably weight, kilograms, pounds for you guys now in America. But with mindfulness and developing like a stronger like prefrontal cortex and like a weaker animal brain. Like what's the, unless you have just a brain scan just like sitting there ready for you, a brain scanner to like scan your brain, which is what they do in research, but like you can't measure that yourself. So I think it's like there might be a few people listening being like, it's just other things have aligned and he's feeling better, and it's not the mindfulness, because I can't prove that to you guys. I can just tell you. And I think that's a really, comes back all the way back to stigma and feelings, and that it's the unknown and the uncertainty of feelings, and like, why do I feel negative today? It's not always apparent.
No, but I think also likewise, like our health, we can't say that we're healthy because we went to the gym that day, but it's one small thing we do to contribute to our physical health, just like eating well. And if you get sick and need treatment beyond those kind of day-to-day maintenance activities that we do, then we know to seek physical health at a doctor. But likewise with your mental health, you can't say that it was definitely the mindfulness that kept you feeling good in your mental health, but it was that kind of day-to-day sustainable practice that you do, like eating well or getting enough sleep. And if you do have poorer mental health, again, you might need to seek more professional help like you would with a doctor. So I think it's all part of aligning that conversation of mental health is health, which is a really important message, and that there are professional ways to seek help if your kind of mental health is still suffering, even if you are engaging in kind of these tools that we use in the day to day. And again, then removing the stigmas around those resources, be that therapy or medication or whatever other resource you're seeking. So it's good to kind of, I think, bring light to the day-to-day practice you can do, because I think some people feel like the only result they have, the only resource they have to protecting their mental health is professional help. But there's a kind of spectrum of ways you can support your mental health, I guess, if that seems fair.
Yeah, I think that the two of those points combined, I think, are pretty potent.
Yeah, on mental health, I think it applies to us a lot, being in this data industry. We're inside, we're what would you say, victims of the modern world, data and technology, the development, not necessarily like in a negative way. I think social media and everything's great. You can phone your granny on the other side of the world, and like that's when we can have this call, we can like spread good messages hopefully, but I think with that, society has changed so much that as human beings and animals, that we haven't like caught up, and can like handle the changes. I think a massive misconception, in my opinion, is that we confuse understanding how the world works with control over how we can live in this world. And I'll give a physical example and then like hopefully a mental example, but car sickness, travel sickness, we understand that we're in a car, we understand that we're traveling. Maybe you're in the back of the car and you start feeling a little bit sick. You would sometimes hear from your mum or your dad, hey, do you want to like move to the front? That helps car sickness. So you move to the front and then you feel better. Like what your body is actually feeling, in my research, and kind of independent research, is that your body thinks you're poisoned, because you have a desync between your visual stimulus, which is static objects, so like the car seat in front of you, like the doors, they're static, but obviously you feel like you're moving, like you can hear like probably the wind going past in your car, so you feel sick, so you move to the front and suddenly you get that visual stimulus back of like objects moving past you. Your body's like, okay, I'm not poisoned, it's okay, we don't need to feel sick anymore. Just because we understand that we're in a car doesn't mean our bodies react as if we're in a car, because cars are like a creation of like the modern world. Now, kind of something similar, but for social media, the feeling of FOMO is quite a new thing, fear of missing out. Maybe you're on Instagram or whatever, you're scrolling, you're seeing your friends having a great time, you're not there. Maybe you've just moved to London because you're a consultant, like myself, and all your friends having a party up in Scotland, and you see it and you can feel like a little bit, oh, I'm missing out, like, and like maybe one off it's not too bad, but then you see it again and again and it's kind of like it weighs down on you. That I can understand. Like, look, I'm in London, they're in Scotland, like I'm scrolling Instagram, it's my friends just having a good time, but my body has, like, Instagram's been around maybe 15 years, if that. My body is used to taking in stimulus from a single environment, whether that's a cave or a field, or my village a few hundred years ago. There was no such thing as like phones or social media or laptops or anything like that. So my body is looking at Instagram, and just because I understand it's on my phone, my body still thinks, oh, all my friends are having a great time right in front of me. And your body will be reacting in that way. As a human, your survival instinct is you don't want to be inferior socially, because that's detrimental to your survival. You want to be part of the herd. We are a community. We've always had clans, we've always had tribes, like we have society now. So if you're seeing all your friends having a great time, your body thinks they're just over there. You're in your room that's not got your paintings on the wall, like it's not got your pictures of your family yet. Like, you're, over time that can have a negative impact on you. So just like we understand we're in a car and we understand that Instagram is like a great tool, that doesn't mean our bodies will react like harm. There's no harm like mental kind of reaction to the modern world that we're living in. And just like I wouldn't take away the car, I wouldn't take away social media, but just like you move to the front of the car, maybe you can mute some notifications so that, you know, every 10 minutes or something, you're not, oh, your best friend's posted on Instagram. And you can just kind of live more like seeing what you're seeing with your eyes rather than like through your phone. And I think there's ways that we're not fully 100% in control of our emotions. And if you understand that, you can then think of ways of how to influence or change your environments to influence your feelings, and physically and mentally. And I think that, yeah, just as we progress as a society and as human beings, like I think that's super important to recognize we're not fully in control, but we can do things to help and get good emotions running through our body.
Well, I think, you know, and a testament to that, you know, me and Cam moved 3,000 miles away from the majority of our tribes, as you call them, right? The people that you've grown up with, your friends, your family, a lot of the time. And I think you're right that fear of not being part of that herd is isolating. And I think the way I've dealt with that is realizing that just because you're moving away from one part of your life doesn't mean that you're isolating yourself. It's kind of that, and that's why I think social media is most dangerous, is like when you are making that life change and you realize that the people that you've had in your life are not going through the same changes, and all of a sudden you have to adapt and find you. And I think it's trying to find that commonality in your new situation, which really breaks through that and ensures that you do feel like you're in a new herd. And I think that's kind of been the most helpful thing for me moving out here, is just like, you know, realizing that I work with a lot of people that are also moving out to New York, and like that, you know, that there are loads of people that I can be friends with and meet in New York. And I think kind of, and part of that is trying to not hide away from social media, because I do like to see what my friends are doing and all of that. But I think it is finding that balance and being, you know, aware of the fact that if I am setting up alerts and continuously looking at what everyone's doing in my my previous circumstance, and comparing myself to that, and not taking this sort of like idea of, you know, of limiting that and only following the stuff which is things that you can sort of digest at the right volume, I think it's really difficult to not feel isolated, right? So I think that's a really cool point to make.
Yeah, and such a valuable conversation to have, because I also think before we had this sort of understanding of these reactions, that we can't change our reactions. I think it's also, even in the age pre-social media, maybe you'd hear from older generations, for people our age, whether that's anyone from across the UK, Scotland, all the way down to London office, or here in the US, we've got consultants moving from California, Indiana, Oklahoma, pretty much across the US to our New York office. You know, a lot of people, you know, would say, you know, you're young, you're adaptable, it's the time to move, make a big change. And it's easy to say, but not having, you know, that's where these conversations are so
But
great.
we're still human. We're still human as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think remembering that we're all in that same boat um, is really, really comforting. I definitely found this conversation comforting. Um, so I think that's about all we have time for. But this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Euan. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining me. We'll link some of our resources in the chat. And we're lucky to have mental health first aiders like Tom working in our UK team and our US team. And everyone, including myself, I'm here as a mental health first aider and a female ally of men's mental health, to have these kinds of conversations whenever Kubrick consultants on either side of the pond want a conversation. We're here for that.